Hi, it's Loren Lockman coming to you from the Tanglewood Wellness Center in Costa Rica. And I've been asked to talk a little bit about the connection between fasting and consciousness. And needless to say, this is a big subject. We're just going to touch on it right now. We're going to look at a couple of particular aspects. But the question has arisen because we have a couple of people here now who've noticed some significant changes to their own personalities and what feels like a shift in consciousness. And so I would suggest that this is actually, in my opinion, the single most potentially powerful aspect of the process. And I think that's saying quite a bit, given the fact we've talked about we have a 100% rate of success with hypertension, with type 2 diabetes, with lower GI tract problems. We have a very high rate of success with multiple sclerosis and a whole host of conditions. And we're talking about many things that medicine says are incurable. So to say that this is more powerful than any of them is a pretty significant statement. And yet, I firmly believe that's so. And perhaps that's because of how I tend to think about what's real and who we are. As most of you here already know, newest guest notwithstanding, I personally believe that we are spiritual beings in a physical experience, having a physical experience, that we are not our physical bodies. We are much more than that, that who we are doesn't die. This is just the form that we're in right now on a particular journey. And so when we talk about consciousness, we talk about spirituality, what we're talking about is bringing ourselves closer back to who we truly are. This is so important that, to be honest with you, this is actually my primary reason for being here. So, it's interesting because almost everybody comes here, and I don't think we have any exceptions here. You mentioned that you were here for both reasons, both the consciousness and the physical body. But almost everybody comes here because they have some physical issue that they'd like to deal with. Either they're dealing with a particular condition that's it's been diagnosed, or undiagnosed in some cases, or they've got something that maybe has never been diagnosed but hasn't been working properly, or they know that they've done 5 or 6 decades on the planet, or 3 or 4, and things aren't working the way they used to, and they simply want to tune up the physical body. But most people come here ostensibly for some physical reasons. And I've probably shared this before. I've been sharing this for a long time. I'm going to share a story with you guys because I love it very much. It's about a town. It could be almost anywhere, but let's put it somewhere, maybe Eastern Europe. A war breaks out between 2 neighboring ethnic groups, and a border goes up, and there's a border guard. And one day a guy shows up at this border crossing. He's got a donkey pulling a cart full of sand. And the border guard says, "What have you got in the cart?" And the guy says, "Nothing, it's just sand." Well, the guard doesn't believe him, and he spends 15 or 20 minutes sifting through the sand, but he can't find anything. And he finally lets the guy pass. And the next day, the same guy shows up at the border crossing with the donkey pulling a cart full of sand. And the guard, they go through the same routine. "What have you got in there?" "Nothing." He doesn't believe him. He searches through it. Can't find anything, and finally lets the guy pass. And this goes on every day for 2 or 3 months. Finally, the conflict ends. The border crossing comes down. It's an open border again. And one day, the former border guard walks into a tavern, and sitting on a bar stool is this guy who showed up at his border crossing every day for 2 or 3 months. And so the guard walks over to him and says, "Listen, we're all friends now. It doesn't really matter." He says, "But I know you were smuggling something. I've got to know what you were smuggling." And the guy sitting on the bar stool looks up at him and smiles. He says, "I was smuggling donkeys."
Oh.
So, in a similar way, for me, the most important thing that we have to offer here is greater spiritual connection, greater level of consciousness. I don't think there is anything more important that we could offer. I don't think there is anything more important, period. I think that's what it's all about. And so we can approach that from several different directions. And it's fine to approach it from any direction that seems fitting and appropriate for you. But it's most powerful to approach it from multiple directions at once. And so we can meditate and we can get comfortable with ourselves, because the whole point of being still and quiet is so that all of the suppressed garbage is allowed to come to the surface. And we can finally have that real look at ourselves and actually come face to face with who we are. Because so often we spend our whole lives hiding behind masks and costumes and pretending to be something we're not really. We can do it that way. That's very powerful and beneficial, and there's huge potential benefits from simply doing that. But I tend to believe that human beings are kind of like computers. And here's what I mean. You buy a computer today, and it's got all kinds of stuff in there already. It's got all kinds of capabilities and all kinds of power. It's got all kinds of information already there. And if you have a good, clear connection to the internet, you've got access to pretty much all the information that human beings now possess. Well, in a similar way, when each of us showed up in this physical incarnation, we already had a whole bunch of stuff in there. Because we're born with cultural knowledge. We're born with knowledge that we get through our DNA. And so we grow up. In fact, some of you, the others of you here that are around my age, have probably noticed how much easier it's been for your children and grandchildren to pick up and use computers and other electronic devices. It's almost as if it's in their DNA. Where, you and I was telling someone the other day, when I went to college, my father bought me a typewriter. Okay, a lot of people watching this have probably never seen a typewriter unless they went to a museum. But there were no computers back then. There were computers, they existed, but not for college students. They were big things that were expensive and not available to the average person. I had a typewriter. I had to turn all my papers and had to be typed on a typewriter. I had one required computer course as a freshman at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and it was punch cards, right? Most of you probably never seen these things, but this is how you program. It took you an hour to write a program that took 15 seconds for the computer to run. It did nothing. I mean, it was the computers back then were as powerful as the average digital watches today. But when we have all the information that we start with, that's fine. That's great. We can operate in the world. We learn more. We have the programs already embedded to learn our languages and learn our customs. But when we have a completely clean system that's vibrating at the same level, the same rate and frequency as the rest of nature, we are connected to source. We're connected to the source of all kinds of information and knowledge, so we can know things that we couldn't know otherwise. And we can, in fact, when we have that same frequency as all of nature, what do we feel? Well, I think we feel connected to nature. When we're vibrating at a frequency that is not clean, not pure, it's not a consistent frequency, and it's not in alignment with the frequencies of any other species or anything in nature, we tend to feel separate from those things, and probably separate from everybody around us as well. And so I would suggest that getting the physical body clean, it's just the vehicle, but getting that vehicle clean and working well as possible allows for a connection and for a level of consciousness that I don't believe is possible otherwise. Now, there have been enlightened spiritual masters who've walked the planet and maybe haven't had perfectly clean systems. Or maybe to a large extent they did. I mean, keep in mind that Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Muhammad, Moses, they all had one thing in common. They all fasted for 40 days. Now, they probably had many things in common, but they had this one major thing in common. They all did an amazingly intense process to cleanse and heal their bodies and to create that greater connection with Source. Now, I've said before jokingly to you guys, if you fast 40 days, you're instantly enlightened. Okay, bad news, it's not actually true. I've fasted many people for 40 days, more than 200 people over the years for 40 days or longer, and I'm not sure that any of them achieved instantaneous full enlightenment. But I think every one of them, almost every one of them, saw a significant shift in their own consciousness, and it doesn't have to be 40 days for that to happen. I mean, it can happen in 20 minutes if you're willing to be completely present. How many people do you know that are willing to be completely present for 20 minutes? I've been on a conscious spiritual path for 39 years. I had my first spiritual teacher when I was 14 years old. Taught me to meditate and taught me about a lot of Buddhist principles. And ever since then, I've been on a conscious spiritual path. And I want to share something with you that I'm somewhat proud to say that in all that time, I have gotten to the point that I can stay absolutely, completely present for 7 or 8 seconds every day. Okay? And I'm shooting for 9 seconds next year. So it's not about attaining a particular goal. It's about moving in the direction that we choose to move in. And people say, well, this is hard work. It's the hardest work that I know of, being willing to be completely present. Because that means being willing to look at your own shadow side, being willing to look at the stuff that you may not really be very comfortable with and may not be very proud of. And if you're not sure how to find those things, it's easy. Think about all the people you don't like and all the things you don't like about them. Because those things are actually things that you find that you're uncomfortable with about yourself. There's some aspect of what's going on with that relationship with somebody else. It's always about yourself. Always. And so I really truly believe that what it's all about is connection with other people and with nature in general, that is spirituality for me. It's about connection with all of what's real, including whatever's true, including whatever's true about me, and including whatever's true about you. And I don't know a human being that hasn't lived some things that maybe they're not completely proud of. But I like to remember that who I am today is the summation of everything, every experience I've had, and every person I've met, and every difficulty I've encountered. All those things together have brought me to this place and have helped make me who I am. And because I'm comfortable with who I am today, there's really no room for regrets. Because although we like to say, well, if that thing hadn't happened, then I would have been this or that. But that's not true. What I mean is, the only thing we can ever know is what's actually happened. I mean, I've sometimes said, I've pointed out that had I not gotten as sick as I did 30 years ago, I sometimes tell people that my getting so sick, and for 3 years I was sicker than anybody I knew at the age of 23 to 26 years old. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And some people, what do you mean? How can that be? Well, it was in being willing to get completely present to what was going on and realize that I needed to be willing to take responsibility for it, to change my situation, that brought me to the place I am today. Where I am today is I've gone 27 plus years without one single day sick. I feel and function better than I ever have in my entire life. And I know that virtually every human being can accomplish the same thing. So had that not happened to me, I probably wouldn't have embarked on the path I did for both physical and spiritual growth. And I would point out that the thousands of people whose lives I've probably touched, I mean, I've worked with more than 4,000 people directly like you, and I've spoken to thousands more in lectures and seminars around the world, and who knows how many more are now coming across YouTube videos and things I've written and published in magazines, etc. And I'm not bragging, but because in fact, every one of us has exactly the same opportunity. You see, the fact is, if you would like to have a positive impact on the planet, you can. And it's actually the easiest thing in the world. Well, let me say the simplest thing in the world. Not necessarily easy, but it's simple. How can you have the most potentially significant positive impact on the planet? Simple. Simply be willing to do everything you need to do to maximize your own growth and potential. Okay? Focus on what you're passionate about. Be willing to be completely honest with yourself and the people around you, and focus on your own consciousness and growth. And when you do that, you will positively impact everybody who comes close to you. They don't have to know what you're doing. They don't even have to meet you. They're going to be affected by your energy. It's going to have a positive impact on a lot of people. The more people you encounter, the more people you'll positively impact. And you can't always know. Sometimes people will encounter that energy and it might challenge them in various ways. Just your energy might challenge them because it's so not what they are. Now the truth is, it's exactly what they are, but it may not be where they are. It may not be what they believe they are. And so it's going to challenge them, it's going to push their buttons. But I've heard from people whose buttons I've pushed and who've pushed my buttons, in some cases 1 or 2 years later, who've written to me to say things like, you know, I want to tell you that the time I spent with you was incredibly challenging for me, but it was the most powerful thing that ever happened to me. And there are many people that you're going to be encountering in your journeys that may not even realize that you were the catalyst, that you were the thing that was affecting them that way. So you won't be hearing from those people because they don't have your email address and they don't know who you are, perhaps. Or they don't recognize that it was you and your energy that affected them that way. But it will be happening. We can't help but affect each other. You walk into a room, or let's say you're sitting in a room, and someone else walks in and they're angry or upset. Do you not feel that energy? You do, don't you? Well, the same thing is true with all forms of energy. And when what you're emanating, in fact, I've had the experience. I consider myself incredibly fortunate. I'm very grateful to have been in the presence of the Dalai Lama and the presence of Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, whose work I'm very, very amazed by. And in both cases, and these are the only two people I've had this experience with. No, there's been a couple others. But in both cases with these two people, sitting in a room with them, you could feel the love emanating from them, affecting everything in the room. Imagine, again, maybe not everybody realized what they were experiencing, but I believe everyone's going to be affected by that. So, we can become our own greatest potential selves by being willing to be as present as possible, by being willing to grow our own consciousness, by making the physical choices that keep our body vibrating with the rhythms of nature. Because when we do that, we create and feel connections that can't happen otherwise. I remember when this first started to happen for me, I'd go out someplace, I'd go out dancing maybe, I'd go by myself to a place that had a ballroom dance. And maybe I'd talk to a few people, but I'd come home and it felt like kind of a lonely experience sometimes. And then somewhere along the way, somewhere along my journey, something shifted, maybe in the same way that you were talking about something shifting for you, and you were talking about something shifting for you, where that never happened anymore. I'd come home and I felt like I had connected deeply with numerous people. And that still happens to me. It's happened ever since. Everywhere I go, I feel like I connect with people. And I think the biggest part of that is getting to the point. I'm far from perfect. You guys have now, most of you have been here for more than a month, almost 2 months. You certainly know that, right? It's not about achieving some imaginary level of perfection. It's about achieving full acceptance of who you are and focus on who you are. Because when I was able to achieve full acceptance of who I am, including all of that horrendous imperfection, when I was truly comfortable with that stuff, it enabled me to look at you and recognize myself in some of your stuff and be perfectly okay with it. And not just his stuff, but your stuff and your stuff and your stuff and your stuff. Everybody's stuff. Because we all have the same kind of stuff. We're all grappling with the same kinds of issues. I mean, in fact, deep down, we all come from one place. And unfortunately, we all have tended to suffer the same lack in our lives at the most crucial time in our lives. As little tiny impressionable beings, most of us never got the unconditional love that we only needed. That way I say we only needed. That was the only thing we really needed. I mean, obviously we needed a little bit of food, and we needed to stay warm enough to survive. But people can survive on very little food when necessary, and under pretty horrendous conditions. And I'm guessing that nobody here suffered those conditions. We would have been better off under those conditions, horrendous physical conditions, with unconditional love. And yet most of us probably didn't get that. And it's not because our parents didn't love us as much as they were able to. It's because our parents probably didn't love themselves as much as they needed to, as much as they were possibly could, and so therefore weren't able to give you what they didn't have themselves. You can only give away what you have. Unfortunately, the things that are most important, when we give them away, they expand. They don't diminish. We don't become poorer for giving away love and generosity and kindness. We become bigger for it. We have more of it ourselves. We multiply it. So, coming back around to the original question, how does fasting affect consciousness? I believe there's a tremendous opportunity to positively affect your consciousness. Now, does everybody experience this benefit that I'm talking about? No, unfortunately not. Why not? Well, some people are unwilling to face their own demons. They're unwilling to look very carefully, very closely at some of their own stuff. And so what they tend to do instead is they keep themselves distracted. We have people here that spend all day on the computer. Or they spend all day reading, or they spend all day talking with other guests. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't beneficial things online, or that you can't learn from talking to people or make great connections. Those things are all perfectly fine. But I would encourage each of you to spend as much time as you're willing to with yourself. I don't mean with yourself in a book, I mean with yourself and yourself. Just be with yourself. It'll probably be the hardest thing you've ever done. It is for most people. But it's only by going through the fire that we can truly be cleansed. It's only by being willing to step out of our own comfort zone that we can actually grow. Because if we stay in places where we're already comfortable, there won't be a lot of growing going on. So, I believe that the potential for greater consciousness that I'm talking about through fasting and not necessarily through fasting, but here we're talking about fasting. I believe it's available to everybody. But you have to be willing to deal with what comes up. You have to be willing to look at your own stuff. You have to be willing to do what might be very difficult for you. And it's only those people who do that in any field. You want to become the best mortgage-backed securities trader, you have to be willing to do the work to get to that point. You want to become the best in anything. Pianist. It could be anything at all. Massage therapist. Doesn't matter what it is. So, I think there's a huge potential opportunity for growth for each of us, because I believe we each have tons of potential for growth. And this is a fantastic opportunity while fasting, because we literally can eliminate virtually all of the normal distractions of life and simply have the time to truly be with ourselves. If you're willing to do that, there are amazing, amazing opportunities and potential for growth. And we often have people like the two of you have spoken up this morning who come forward and say, I feel like a different person. I feel like a different being. I came in depressed and under a cloud, and now I feel connected and happy and joyful. And if that doesn't seem important to you, if you're watching this, I would suggest it's actually the most important thing. That it will underpin healing of all physical issues. And the first step, get to a place where you're truly in joy. So I hope that's been beneficial for you. I'll see you next time.